Hi, I'm Jack Dennis. For years, I've come to Canada to lecture about fly fishing in streams. When I come to Canada, I find out they know far more about lake fishing than I'll ever know. Over the years, I've had a chance to meet some wonderful Canadian lake fishermen and fly tyers. A few years back, a friend of mine by the name of Brian Chan, and many of you know that name, introduced me to a man sitting next to me here, Phil Rowley. I had a chance to view his flies at the Canadian Fly Fishing Show last year, and I invited him to tie some flies for us, and he said, wait a minute, you got to come up to Canada if you're going to tie some flies, and I'm going to show you how to fish them. So Phil, we're in your home country.
Well, thanks for inviting me along, Jack, and I hope to show you some of our techniques and some of the flies that are successful not only here in Canada, but all over the world.
What do you think's the hardest part about going into a lake?
Well, I think after you come from a river or a stream background, they just look so featureless. They're flat. There's no real clues. There's no undercut banks, no overhanging branches, no rocks that can easily predict where a fish may or may not lay. All of the clues are beneath the surface, and you've got to overcome that barrier and find out they're just as easy to read as, if not easier in some cases, than your rivers or your streams.
I know that we're going to be tying some flies, and you've kind of grouped those flies to kind of match the type of fishing. And what are they?
Well, we tend to, the way we've got the flies grouped here is by seasonal importance. A generic sort of when you're most likely to run into these food sources, but you need to understand that, like most things in nature, it can be complex. So what may be thought of as an early season food item can also appear in the middle of July or at the end of September. So you got to be versatile.
Well, it's the third week of May. You've never been to this lake, have you?
No, not before.
So what fly are we going to start out tying and using on this lake?
Well, I'm going to start with a leech. I talked about using a pattern that can be seen out in open water, is quite mobile, moves around. I can cover water with it, find fish, and then once we find those fish, get more into sort of the other more specific patterns and target those particular food sources.
What are the most important elements in tying this leech pattern?
I'm looking for, well, when any fly, I'm looking at 4 keys actually: size, shape, color, and behavior. And behavior for me is twofold. It's either in the manner that I present it and the choice of materials. So in relation to leeches, I'm looking for soft, mobile materials that when they get wet, they'll be animated: marabous, fur, rabbit, mink, squirrel, grizzly marabou, aftershaft feathers, all those kind of things. Things that come alive without any sort of action from the angler.
And what do you call this pattern?
That's called the WASTROL LEECH.
The WASTROL LEECH?
Because it looks like all that junk and corruption you throw in the wastrel when you're finished.
Okay, we're going to tie this first, and then we're going to go out and fish it. So let's go to the bench, everybody, and see some of the magic that Phil can produce.
Well, we're back at the vise, and now we're going to tie the WASTROL LEECH. So into the jaws of the vise, I've placed a size 8, 4 extra long streamer hook. You can tie this from, say, 12 all the way up to a number 6. Number 8's a good all-around hook for this fly. First thing we're going to do is weight the front portion of the hook, and I've got some 2,000th diameter lead wire, and I'm just going to wrap about, say, 10 to 20 wraps. Obviously, the more you weight the hook, the deeper the fly will travel. But the key on this fly is not so much how much weight, but where you put the weight. In that, we want this fly to pitch up and down when we retrieve it. So by weighting the front portion, when I strip this fly through the water, it's going to rise up, and when I release the retrieve, it's going to dive down, simulating that natural undulating motion of a leech. For the thread, we're going to use some 8/0 olive thread, and we're just going to simply start the thread at the front of the hook, trim away the excess, hold that lead in place. I want to keep that front eye area open so I can finish the fly, and I don't have a ditch at the end of the fly, if you like, a big cliff for that thread to fall off. So I'm just going to run the thread back and forth a few times, build up a few little thread ramps on either side of that lead, and then carry on and cover the rest of the hook shank with tying thread so I have a good base to tie in my tail. Once that hook shank is covered, we're going to take the tying thread back up just to the rear of the lead, and this is where we're going to tie in the tail. I'm going to use 2 plumes of grizzly marabou. And this is a very underrated feather. This is the Stillwater Solutions grizzly marabou. I've got 1 olive plume, 1 brown plume, And mixing them together gives a good natural contrast, and the natural barrings of the feather further aid. And I'm just going to lay these as best I can and even them up, tip to tip, and sort of stroke them together. You can moisten your fingers a little bit, and that helps control the feathers. And I want to pre-measure this. I want this tail to extend about 1 shank length past the bend of the hook. So it's going to extend right back to here. Once I've got that measurement in place, I transfer that to my left thumb and forefinger, slide my right thumb and forefinger forward to where the thread is, and I'll re-grasp the feathers right where that thread is hanging, and I'll come in with my scissors and trim away the excess. And now that's already pre-measured right back between my thumb and forefinger. Then take a soft loop, go around the materials a couple of times, get that in place, pull off some thread, and using open turns, simply slide my thumb and forefinger back. And what I'm doing is I'm lifting up slightly on the marabou, and what that does is make sure that it rights itself on top of the hook shank. It won't want to twist and roll around and get out of control. And there you can see we've got a nice, bushy, fluffy tail. When this gets wet, this is going to undulate, and that combined with the front hook being weighted, it'll pitch and look like a natural leech. Now that we've got the grizzly marabou tail tied in place, we're going to use an innovative tool created by Swiss fly tyer and fly fisher Marc Petitjean called the Magic Tool. It consists of a series of 3 benches and 2 clips, and we're simply going to use the combination of these tools to fold grizzly marabou plumes and use the clip to place those folded plumes into the dubbing loop. It's really an innovative technique, and it can really help you manage materials such as grizzly marabou that have a thick stem that can make them tough to wind up a hook shank. Now that I've explained the tool, let's put it to use. What I've got here is 1 plume of olive grizzly marabou. First of all, I'm going to remove this secondary aftershaft feather, a great feather under its own right, and we'll show how we use that a little later on. We're going to take this feather, and I'm going to stroke it from tip to butt to make those fibers stand out, and lay it on top of the Magic Tool bench so that the stem of the feather is running down the seam of the jaws. I'm going to take a second grizzly marabou plume, again remove that secondary aftershaft feather, stroke the feather from butt to tip to make it stand out, and then I'm going to rotate this feather so that the tip is at the butt of one end and vice versa on the other. This way the feather is not competing with the tool, and we've got the width of the stems of the grizzly marabou evenly distributed along the length of the tool. With the marabou plumes prepared, I'm just going to simply grasp both ends of these plumes, and using a gentle downward pressure and supporting the tool with my other fingers, I'm just going to pull these feathers, folding them into the jaws of the tool like so. Once the feathers are folded, the next step is to simply take a pair of scissors, and we're going to trim off each end and remove the waste, the tip and the butts of the feathers respectively. Once this is folded in, you can see what we've got here is the tips of the marabou plumes are folded nicely here, and the stems are actually buried into the jaws of the tool, and this is the first step in getting them sort of out of the equation so they don't get in the way of constructing the balance of the fly. I'm simply going to rotate this 90 degrees so it's running vertical, and I'm going to come in with the clear plastic clip, open the jaws, and using a deliberate motion going from bottom to top, slide the clear clips over the tips and then release my grip so that they grasp the tips of the feathers. The beauty of the clear jaws is it allows you to adjust for different materials, for different lengths, different sizes of the flies, simply by where you choose to grasp the feathers. We want to get the full use of these feathers, so I'm going to grasp them right close to the bench of the jaws. I'm going to use my left hand here in this case and gently open the jaws, and using a downward motion slide the feathers away from the jaws, the bench itself. And there you can see the stems of the feathers are isolated nicely, and we can simply use a pair of scissors. I'm just going to transfer this over to my left hand, going to roll everything around, and gently just trim away those unwanted stems. And now I have those nice, soft, desirable plumes that will provide great animation to this fly in the jaws of the Magic Tool that can be easily inserted into a dubbing loop, which is what we're going to do next. So we've now prepared the grizzly marabou plumes, and they're sitting safely in the clip of the Magic Tool. Next step is I'm going to form a dubbing loop by simply supporting the hook, pulling down on the bobbin, forming a loop around my forefinger of my left hand and bringing it straight back up to the hook shank and wrapping the thread around 2 or 3 times to lock it in place. This loop should be about 4 inches long. You don't want to make a long dubbing loop. Long dubbing loops are hard to control, and it's far better if you get a bigger fly to construct the body out of 2 dubbing loops as opposed to 1 8-inch long dubbing loop that's ungainly and kind of tough on the knuckles as you wind it up at the hook shank and banging things on the bench. Once we've got that loop formed, I'm now going to carry on and wind the thread backwards. Once I've got the loop secured, I actually rotate the loop to the top of the hook shank and secure it back to the base of the tail, much like I'm securing any tail material onto the shank of the hook, whether I'm tying a nymph or a dry fly. Once that's done, I'm going to carry that the tying thread back up to the hook eye, and what this does is it closes up the dubbing loop right at the base here so things will not want to slide out. With the dubbing loop now formed, I'm going to take my magic tool clip that's holding our prepared grizzly marabou plumes. I'm going to push up slightly on the dubbing tool, and this opens the loop up slightly, allowing me to insert the materials. The magic tool clip itself is wedge-like, which aids inserting the materials into the dubbing loop. I'm simply going to push up again, open that up, roll my wrist, slide the materials as far up the loop as I can. With the grizzly marabou now in place, held in only by the tension, I don't use dubbing wax. I simply open the jaws of the magic tool clip using a deliberate motion and slide them gently out of the picture. Thread tension will hold those materials in place. I'm now going to prepare a second clump of grizzly marabou in the same manner as the first because I can get 2 applications in here, and if we're fortunate, 2 applications wound forward will form the body of this simple fly. I've prepared a second pair of grizzly marabou plumes in the same manner as the first, folding them into the jaws of the magic tool bench. I'm now going to transfer them to the plastic clip. To do this, I simply open the jaws, slide them up, close them around the tips of the feathers, open the jaws of the bench, and using a downward motion, gently slide these materials out of the way. I now take a pair of scissors and I'm just going to trim away the unwanted stems. Just be very gentle with your motions and you shouldn't get into trouble. I'm now going to take this prepared clump and in the same manner as the first, use the wedge-like features of the clip to help insert these materials into the base of the loop, open it just wide enough to get them, use a gentle rolling motion of your wrist, slide them up into place, pull down, and release the clip. If you really get skilled with this, you can simply manipulate the feathers and make sure you get as much length as you can. We want to have a nice long flowing fly. I've now got the loop loaded with the prepared folded grizzly marabou plumes. I'm going to pull down slightly on the dubbing whorl and using a gentle spinning motion, start off slowly so I don't have the inertia of my actions throw the materials out of the dubbing noodle. And as they get twisted in place, I can go faster, faster, faster. You'll lose a little bit of fibers, but not too much. And when those fibers radiate out about 90 degrees to the dubbing loop, you're ready to wind them forward. Again, you can see that the fibers radiate 90 degrees to the dubbing noodle, so they're ready to wind forward. They're well and truly locked in place. And all I'm going to do is grasp the dubbing twister in my right thumb and forefinger, holding those spring arms tight so the loop doesn't disengage, and wind the dubbing noodle forward in close touching turns, one next door to the other. And you'll notice that I'm using my left thumb and forefinger to sweep any fibers back out of the way. I don't want to trap anything down. I want to have this big, fuzzy, fluffy looking mess as though this fly fell in the bathtub with a hairdryer or something like that. And again, you can moisten your thumb and forefingers. It helps control marabou. And you can sort of see how the fly got its moniker, the WASTROL LEECH, because it looks like all that fluff and refuse everyone throws into their wastrel when they're designing other flies and tying other flies. I've got one wrap probably a bit too far here, so we can back off. I don't want to crowd our head. I'm just going to pass the thread over the dubbing noodle a couple of times and fold it back and lock it in place so it doesn't accidentally pull out, and come in with my scissor tips and just trim away the excess dubbing noodle. Now we're simply ready to finish the fly. To do this, I'm just going to moisten my thumb and forefinger to expose the hook eye, build up a neat, tiny head, Sweep everything back out of the way and take our Mattarelli style whip finisher and build up a neat head and finish the fly. We've got one more simple step to do and our WASTROL leech is complete. Now you remember our very first step was to weight the fly. And the trouble is when you're out on the water, at least when I'm on the water, it's not always easy to keep track of which flies are weighted and which flies are not weighted. And some tyers use different color tying thread. Some are even organized far above my standards to keep their weighted flies separate from unweighted flies. I know by the end of the day I've probably got flies all over the place. Hopefully it's been an exciting day. What I use is a simple red Sharpie marker. Red nail polish works as well. And all I do is I come in and I cover the eye of the fly so it's red. So I know that when I look in my fly box, anything with a red hook eye is weighted. And by this way, I can tie a dozen of these flies, and the marking of the flies is one final step that I can do all at once, saving me time. I'm not switching bobbins or doing things like this or worried about which fly box it goes in. So there we have the completed WASTROL leech. Again, so named because it looks like just a big mass of fluff and feathers that people throw out. But once wet, this mobile material springs to life, and be prepared for takes on the drop. And I mean, when the fly is sinking through the water after the cast is made, fish will see this fly pulsing and breathing as it falls down through the water column and come up and engulf it. It's a really simple fly, a natural modeled look. You can tie it in a wide range of colors. My favorite colors, I love this brown and olive, an all olive. You can mix light olive and dark olive, a host of different leech colors to match whatever leeches you encounter on your local waters. A great, simple Stillwater fly.